Welcome back to the Flex Diet Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike D. Nelson. On this podcast, we talk all about things you can do to enhance your performance. Could be in the gym, could be in life, add more muscle, better body composition, all without destroying your health in the process. Today, it is brought to you by the Physiologic Flexibility Certification. If you're listening today when this podcast came out on Monday, September 20th, 2021, this is the last day to get into the Physiologic Flexibility Certification for this year. Go to physiologicflexibility.com for all the information there. And if you're listening outside of that time period, you can go to the same link, physiologicflexibility.com, and you'll be able to get on the wait list for the next time that it opens. You will be the first to be notified. And I've got lots of great daily free content for you there too. So go to physiologicflexibility.com. Today, just wanted to review a concept that I teach in the Physiologic Flexibility Cert that I don't see a lot of people talking about, but I've seen very high-level lifters do this combination of techniques to enhance performance a lot of the time. Now, again, I think they're doing it when I've talked to them about it, kind of unconsciously, that their body and brain has figured out that this works well. I don't think they're doing it necessarily consciously. But what's cool is it can be taught, and you don't need any special techniques in terms of technology to do these techniques. They are free, and they involve the interaction of breathing and your eye function. So Dr. Andrew Huberman has talked about how your eye function is related to your autonomic nervous system. So check out his podcast and all of his amazing information. If I am doing meditation outside, I want to have a more open gaze. Imagine looking at the ocean. So sitting on the beach, this kind of very panoramic view. Most people feel quite relaxed doing that. So a more relaxed gaze, panoramic view is more on the parasympathetic side of your nervous system. This is the rest and digest branch of the autonomic nervous system, like pushing down on the brake pedal on your car. You're slowing down heart rate. I'm increasing something called vagal tone. I'm becoming more parasympathetic, so more rest and relax, better digestion, etc. If I now change my focus of my eyes to a position that is very close in front of me, say I put my hands out about a foot, 2 feet within distance from my eyes, and I focus exclusively on the tip of my finger, that will drive my nervous system a little bit more sympathetic. And you can use this technique with lifting. So before a lift, I probably want to be more sympathetic, right? A little more fight or flight, hopefully not freeze. When I'm in between sets, I want to be more parasympathetic. I want the ability to be more relaxed. I want the ability to recover a little bit. Again, if you are trying to stay on the entire time for a lifting session or a big game or whatever you're doing for performance, I think some athletes can get away with that for a period of time. But what I've seen is the cost is very high. So if we look at their heart rate variability scores the next day, they tend to still be a little bit more sympathetic. People I've talked to who have worked with a lot of, let's say, NHL players, the sympathetic monsters who show up through their facility, do good for 2, 3, maybe 4 years, and then they seem to just kind of disappear. The athletes who can better regulate being on when they need to and off when they need to, they anecdotally tend to last much longer, sometimes over a decade in the NHL, for example. And my bias is I think this applies to other sports and even just lifting in the gym. So eye position and what you do with your eyes has an effect on your autonomic nervous system. So just think about that the next time you are between sets and when you are focused on right before doing a set or during the exercise itself. At that point, you want to be very sympathetic. If you have ever tried to exercise when your max heart rate is not able to get really high, maybe you have extreme levels of fatigue or you're kind of parasympathetically overreached, you find that your performance is actually not very good. So again, we want the ability to be sympathetic when we need to. We want the ability to be more parasympathetic and relaxed when we need to. I think it's a skill set we can teach to go back and forth between being parasympathetic and sympathetic. And I think that will result in a much better level of performance at a lower cost in order to do it. Now we can start layering in other things here. Another thing we can layer in, for example, would be breathing techniques. If we are breathing, let's say we'll just look at speed. If we are breathing faster, that is more on the sympathetic side of the spectrum. If we are breathing slower, our respiratory rate or our frequency is slower, we are more on the parasympathetic side. So again, we can use this to our advantage for lifting. So in between sets, we're going to work to try to lower our breathing rate, which again, with rest will automatically happen also. And then we can increase it slightly before a big lift. Now, I would not go so far as to do a ton of hyperventilation or supraventilation techniques before a big lift, because if you get really crazy with that, there is a risk you can pass out or feel dizzy. You definitely do not want to do that holding dumbbells over your face, having a loaded barbell on your back, or even something that you think may be relatively safe like a deadlift. It gives me a flashback to a story in Costa Rica a couple of years ago where we had a contest down there and a guy dropped a 500-pound trap bar and it bounced and it sliced the end of his toe off. So again, all of these I think carry risks, so you want to make sure it is very short and very controlled. I would not start doing a bunch of Wim Hof or superventilation methods before a max lift. But for most people, 2 or 3 fast inhales will do the trick. Again, make sure that you practice this without any load. Practice this in your warm-ups and make sure that you do not get dizzy, lightheaded, or anything like that. It goes without saying, always lift if you're doing squats and other exercises in a cage. So if something goes wrong, same with bench press, that you're going to be in a safe environment. So speed of lifting is something else we can play with. I should say speed of breathing to match lifting for performance. So far on the list, we've got eyes and what they're looking at, wide or narrow. And we've got breathing rate, so fast or slow. Now we can go even beyond, and I break down the full protocol in the Physiologic Flexibility Cert of nasal versus mouth breathing. So in short, nasal breathing, and there is research on this, is more on the parasympathetic side. Mouth breathing is a little bit more on the sympathetic side. We can also play around with the duration of the inhale versus the exhale. As we inhale, something called respiratory sinus arrhythmia, or RSA, which is arrhythmia but not necessarily a bad thing. As we inhale and exhale, our heart rate changes a little bit. And we can measure this by using heart rate variability. So if we inhale, we get a little bit more sympathetic. We are increasing heart rate a little bit. When we exhale, we are decreasing heart rate a little bit. So again, by playing around with either nasal versus mouth, longer inhale versus exhale, or your ratio of those two, we can then also bias your nervous system a little bit more towards parasympathetic or sympathetic. We can use these techniques during lifting. We could use these techniques to get ready for a big session or a big lift. We can then also use them for periods of recovery. So when you are doing breathing techniques or meditation, we can then bias you more towards a parasympathetic side. And what's super cool is if you're measuring heart rate variability, you can then determine at that point in time, is your body more on the parasympathetic or the sympathetic side? And that'll also give you some information about how to use these techniques. So a quick example on that is, so for example, today, when I'm recording this, I'm a little bit more on the sympathetic side. And I've done HRV enough to know that I've got a bigger session for lifting today and I will be fine. But if that trend had continued for more than a couple days, I'm going to try to bias things that I know are more on the parasympathetic side. So I would do more meditation, breathing outside. I would do a relaxed panoramic view. I would go more with nasal breathing, and I would go more with a longer exhale. All of those are going to bias me more to the parasympathetic side. For exercise, I usually will do more lower to moderate intensity cardiovascular training. And even with that, I can then bias my breathing to more nasal in and out. That also limits the intensity techniques so that I am not going too far on the sympathetic side. So again, this is pretty cool, I think, and I don't see or haven't seen a lot of people put it together all in one. So shameless plug, the PhysFlex Cert, we go through all the mechanisms of this, all of the background in the oxygen and the CO2 regulation, what is going on, why that a homeostatic regulator, such as oxygen and CO2 levels in the body, is a big deal. There's some very fascinating data also on something called a cross-adaptation, looking at cold water immersion or exposure and your ability to handle a low oxygen environment. Here's a hint, it actually upregulates your ability to do that. So not only are there specific things you can do for your nervous system, like we just discussed, as you target the other homeostatic regulators, there appears to be some cross-adaptation effects there. So doing cold water immersion, even though it has everything to do with temperature, at a cellular mechanistic level, it may allow you to be better at times with less oxygen. So again, it may allow you to be better on some more exhaustive exercise. So on the Physiologic Flexibility Cert, we show you how to target the four main homeostatic regulators, one of them being temperature, pH, fuel systems, so glucose and ketones, and then also oxygen and carbon dioxide. And then we break it down and make it applicable with specific action items that you can do that are relatively simple to do. Most of them, you don't need a lot of expensive technology. You can add some technology if you want. We cover both. So this protocol of how to enhance acute lifting performance and do it at a lower cost so that you are able to do more of it. So today, if you're listening to this on Monday, September 20th, is the last time the open enrollment is going on for the PhysFlex Cert for this year, 2021. So go to physiologicflexibility.com and you will be able to get all the information and enroll there. If you're listening to this after that time, still go to the same URL, physiologicflexibility.com, and you'll be able to get on the wait list for the next time that it opens. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. We will talk to you soon.